Hey, you know how you have that neighbor who you just kind of shout over the fence to and ask advice to? Well, that's kind of what we're going to be doing today. My friend Eric from Gardenfork and I are working together on a project with Troy built, and it's called Fence Talks. And the idea is that he's got some questions and he needs a little bit of help in his garden, and he's made some videos of that, and I'm actually going to be helping him out, and we're sort of bringing you all along for the ride. Because I think some of these problems are common ones that you might be experiencing in your garden. So it's sort of our way to talk over the fence to you too. So check out some of the questions and answers here, and then head over to Gardenfork to get some more, because he's got some more over there. And hopefully these will help you guys out with some common problems that you might be finding in your garden as well.
This is kind of comfy. Well, it's comfy for the 14-year-old here. But my yard, my grass, is turning into a moss yard. And it's kind of comfy and neat, but it is incredibly fragile also. The younger labs tear through here, and just chunks of moss come flying up, and then it's bare ground. And if I run any kind of if I run my quad through here, it tears it up. I'm not even going fast, I'm just driving to go somewhere. So how can I reclaim my yard back to grass from the comfy moss? It does feel kind of nice, but I'd rather have the grass because it's my grass yard. So what do you think, Erin?
Well, Eric, I wanted to see if you were right about moss being soft, so Odin and I came down here to check it out, and you're right, it is. We have a lot of it in our yard too, and like you, I don't really mind the way it looks. It's green all the time, it's kind of pretty, but the worst thing about this moss is that it's sort of just patchy moss. There's a little bit of grass growing, there's a little bit of weeds growing. It's not like it's exactly a moss garden. So the problem with moss is that, like you said, it can get ripped up easily, it's not very durable, and a lot of people just don't like the look of it, which I think is just fine. Do you, Odin? He's not impressed. Moss is not killing your grass, it's just taking advantage of areas where grass won't grow. And there's usually there's two reasons for that: shade and compaction in your soil. So in order to get your grass growing again and get rid of the moss, what you really need to do is correct those problems. So for shade, you might have to trim some trees up a little bit to open things up a little bit. For the compaction, you can rent a core aerator, or you can actually use like a broad fork or a garden fork. So if you're using something like a broad fork or just your basic garden fork, you just want to stick it in there, give it a little bit of a rock to kind of help open that up. Something like golf spikes is not going to be enough. They sell, and I've seen like shoes with little spikes on them that are meant for this. You really need to go in there deeper and have bigger holes than those will allow to really make any difference in the compaction. And when you're done with that, you just go through, and if you can put a little compost, sprinkle a little compost on top of there, that will really help open up the soil and aerate. And then you can start planting your grass again, and then hopefully you can get that grass lawn back again.
Salad green utopia here. I started these in early spring. I used the new hoop house I built with the hinged side. I was super happy with it, sprouted really nicely. And as soon as it gets to be a couple inches, guess who comes by and starts munching? And then in the yard here, I've got a bunch of different trees that have this on it. The deer are ripping the bark off of my trees. Erin, what do I do about the deer in my garden?
Boy, no, I know what you mean about deer damage. See this tree right here? Used to point straight up. Now it's at an angle because last fall some deer came along and got so enthusiastic about eating it that it actually pushed it over. It happened to several of our trees last year too. And that's not the only thing that deer do in our yard. So we've got some trees that look like yours, Eric. This is what deer do when they're in rut. They go and rub up against trees and stuff, and can cause a ton of damage. So the way we solved it is by getting one of these little spiral tubes. So we just wrapped that around the tree trunk to keep them from getting at. We should have protected our trees before it happened last year, and this year we will do that for sure. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but that'll do, and those things cost about $1 or $2 a piece. So well worth the investment. If they do it on a big tree, it doesn't hurt as much, but on these young trees with this thin bark, anytime they work through that first layer, it can be really bad for your trees. So of course the other kind of damage that deer do is that they eat your plants, and that is really frustrating for homeowners when you spend all this time and money on these plants and then in one night they're gone. So you have a few choices. You can put a fence around your entire property, and that's a big fence, that's about 8 feet tall, or 2 shorter fences about 4 feet apart from each other. Or you can plant deer-resistant plants, and that list of deer-resistant plants changes from year to year, from place to place. There are very few truly 100% deer-proof plants. Or if you want to grow things like these hostas, which I wouldn't be without hostas, I gotta have them, you're gonna have to do something to protect those plants. So what I use is a deer repellent. There's lots of good ones on the market. Some smell really bad when you first apply them, some don't. But generally speaking, it's a spray that you have to put on them. Some sprays last longer than others. The thing to do is they will last probably up to 3 weeks if you don't get a lot of rain. But if you get a lot of rain, then you need to reapply really quickly. Don't worry too much about the foul odor that some of them have. As soon as they dry, that odor goes away, but that's what's helping keep the deer away from your plants. So it's doing a good job.
I'm seeing more and more of this in my yard. This is garlic mustard. It's an invasive. There are flies biting my arm. Hold on. Spring in New England here. But I've seen this creep into my town. I see it come up the road, the sides of the roads, and now all of a sudden it's in my yard. It was like, yes, last year there was nothing, and all of a sudden this spring I noticed these little flowers, not leaves, on the ground, and all of a sudden, boom, these stick up, and I have garlic mustard in my yard. It's not in the garden beds yet, but it's coming. So Erin, what to do?
Eric, you're smart to be worried about garlic mustard weed. It's a huge problem. It's an invasive species here. It's not necessarily in other places, but in North America, it's an invasive species. And so what that means is that it will come into especially wooded areas, and it will outcompete all the natives. And next thing you know, you have no natives, and that puts our native plant populations at risk. But it also can make its way into your garden, and that's no good either. So garlic mustard weed is actually kind of an interesting plant. It's allelopathic, and what that means is that it actually has a chemical that inhibits the growth of other plants around it. So it does its job equally well because it spreads like wildfire, and then it also keeps other plants from getting established near it. So the right thing to do is absolutely pull it. There is no option here. You gotta pull it. Unfortunately, it grows in these huge clusters, and I'm pretty good about managing it. I have probably pulled over the last 10 or 15 years, probably hundreds and hundreds of big garbage bags full of garlic mustard weed. And actually, I'm getting on top of it a little bit, but I'm over in an area on the edge of our property, and I'm not being a very good neighbor. We don't see this area very much, but our neighbors look at this, and what I don't do here will cause a problem in their yard. So it's important that I pull these. And that's what you need to do with garlic mustard weed. Now, ideally you pull it as soon as you see it, because once you get to this point, when it's flowering, which is when you might notice it, because you'll see these little white flowers all over the place, it is just moments until this spreads seed, and each plant can spread so many seeds. So the seeding is what really gets you on this. So the good news with garlic mustard weed, if there is one, is that if the soil is moist, it's very easy to pull. You can pull it right out by its roots very easily. So wait until after rain if you're able to, or even water an area so that the soil's nice and moist, so you can just pull it out by the handful. And as long as you pull it by the base of the plant, you should be able to get those roots. Now, it's important to get those roots, and if you start pulling and you find that you're breaking the roots off, then you're going to have to go in there and start digging weeds out. So don't take any shortcuts on that. But you can make a lot of headway pretty quickly when you're clearing out garlic mustard weed, because it does pull pretty quickly. When you throw away garlic mustard, we do not put it in your compost pile or a burn pile or just leave it out in the sun to dry, because these seeds can still produce after you pull the plant. So what you need to do is get it into a garbage bag and then throw it away. So that's what you need to do. Bag it, throw it away. Don't let it keep going. So I don't know if you guys have any of these problems in your garden, but if you do, I hope this was helpful for you. And maybe if you have them in the future, you already know how to solve them. Now remember, there's more tips and questions over on Eric's channel, so head on over to Gardenfork and check out what's happening over there, because we're doing more garden and yard problem solving over there.